This is Adam Muffich with the High Performance HVAC podcast, and I'm here with David Richardson. And we wanted to chat a little bit about our experience yesterday working in the field and playing with ComfortMaxx. Um, we have a new software that we started playing with yesterday. We were filming it, and I wanted to ask you, can you explain to everybody what is ComfortMaxx? I know you helped develop the original ComfortMaxx.
Yeah, we were actually some of the when we were still in business, we were some of the original beta testers and we gave a lot of feedback to Rob and Dominic as they were developing it. And what it always stood apart to me was when we were going through it was a software that allowed us to prove that our work truly did what we said it was going to do. It allowed us to verify the system's performance instead of relying just on yellow labels on the side of the equipment or an AHRI rating. It allowed us to show a customer that, the work that we did mattered and we could prove it through measurements.
Awesome. Yeah. So you mentioned system. That's one of the things we focused on yesterday in the video. The equipment, it was a pretty complicated setup, right?
It
We
was.
went through kind of a learning process to test the home. It was an attic system. It had a furnace up in the attic, and we had a couple different filter grills.
Yeah.
And what was the other? Ran into another pretty big challenge.
It was, we're in East Tennessee and it was during the middle of a heat wave
Yep.
and we were around 95 degrees. The attic temperatures were what, 130 that one time you measured. So, I mean, it was hot. There was a lot of up and down that we were doing. And, I don't think we could have predicted. It was a great test because there were things that we couldn't predict that we were there that we discovered as we were going through and testing. We were like, oh, couldn't predict that, couldn't predict that. And I think it'd be cool if we really went into some of those also.
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of a teaching experience because we learned by doing, like, because it was probably the worst case type of house and system that we probably could have tested for the
Right.
first time, right? So one of the challenges I wanted to bring up is filter grills. So how does
For
that
sure.
tie into ComfortMax? Because we're measuring airflows and temperatures, right?
Yeah. Because what we found yesterday is we needed a fan airflow measurement. And the most accurate way to do that is with the digital true flow grid. We had nowhere to use the digital true flow grid at the equipment. So it was a fairly new system. So we had to rely on the manufacturer's fan tables. And we had those. We measured total external static pressure. And then we started looking at the fans table footnotes. And what's interesting with fan tables is there's no consistency in how the manufacturers rate their fans. One manufacturer may rate theirs a little bit differently than another. And we found there were some inconsistencies in this fan table that we had to account for in our measurements. And for a little bit, when you're in a 130-degree attic and you're scratching your head, I didn't know you could sweat that much. That was impressive. You sweated a lot.
Oh yeah.
So when you sweat out, also your knowledge sweats out. And we were questioning ourselves like, wait a minute, how do we account for that? Finally, we got it under control and we started seeing how much airflow that the fan was. We estimated what the fan was moving. And then we started comparing that against the performance data. And I think that's where you started pointing out some inconsistencies, even between the fan table and the performance data that we saw.
Yeah, that was, and I question right now. We don't really have to talk about the exact model of the equipment, but when you look at performance data, usually for a condenser or a heat pump, it will give you three different airflow ratings,
Yeah.
right? And I noticed in the manual, the three airflow ratings for a 3.5 ton piece of equipment was the same airflow ratings for a 4 ton piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And something, your red flag, your spidey sense goes off. You're like, maybe they copied and pasted wrong in the manual,
Yeah.
right?
And then the capacities though were different.
Yep.
So even those airflows were the same standard airflows. For that one system that we tested. The lowest airflow was actually too much for the climate that we were in,
Yep.
that we're in right now.
Absolutely. Um, but the equipment itself was actually performing very well. The contractor, whoever
Yeah.
installed that system, the duct system and everything, I was pretty surprised when we were going up there. We didn't know what the R value of the
Right.
ducts were, and you're like, black flex. We're in the south. It's R 4.2. That was what you assumed, and I thought
Yeah.
you were right. You know.
And then we got up there and saw R8. And for residential, there's it's easy to beat up on residential new construction guys, and we tend to stereotype that. But the installing contractor on this job, they did a really good job. You could tell that they tried to do the right things as they put the job in, because we were surprised by the details to it. The things that went, at least in my opinion, went above and beyond code. And I don't know if code exists in East Tennessee. I think it's like Kentucky. You could just flush your toilet over the hill if you want. But so there may be code, there may be not. So I don't know the standards, but for for the amount of workmanship that I know is usually price driven in a track development, these guys did a really good job. And I
Yeah,
mean, even we were surprised how well the equipment performed.
absolutely. Yeah, but one thing we did notice after completing the entire test, the system didn't get that great of a grade.
No, no, it didn't. What did it came out like 68% of the equipment's rated capacity.
Yep.
So basically, we were losing a little over a ton of cooling capacity just through the duct system because of where it was located in the attic. And it was actually probably what, half and half, or maybe 60-40, 60 in the attic, and then the other 40% in, inside the conditioned space in between walls and floors, because you had a system in the attic that was conditioning two separate floors, and you had outdoor air temperatures that were hot. You had a hot attic air temperature, and as you said, black flex duct. So I mean, it was just absorbing all that heat out of that attic.
Yep. The before we did that test, the night before, I ran a load calc on the house, right?
Yeah,
And this house is only a couple of years old, and it has a 3.5 ton, 90,000 BTU furnace. And what the load calc came back at is we had what was it, 2.5 tons of heat gain and
yeah,
42,000 BTUs ish of heat loss.
right.
And I know when I first said that, we were standing in a group of, and we were all kind of talking about it, and everyone kind of looked at me sideways, like, I don't know, but the house is cooling normally.
Yeah,
And what was the BTUs that we had
it was a,
delivered?
it was a little better than 2 tons of delivered capacity coming into the space, and we were like, you were spot on.
Yeah,
And even then, you were probably a little bit conservative,
yep.
because I think you estimated R6 on your flex duct.
R6, and I put all of the duct system in the attic.
Yeah,
So
so 2 ton probably could get by with it. Well, and it was pretty obvious right at a 2 ton was cool in this house. At least delivered capacity was was making a pretty big difference. It was comfortable, because when we came out of the attic, it felt like you were walking into Alaska. It was cold, but man, it felt good.
yeah. But that was one thing that it kind of threw us. I mean, it wasn't that big of a deal, but it became a little bit of a nuisance, being that the system was zoned, right?
Oh
Because
yeah,
we're letting it run for long periods of time, and then it was like one zone would cycle off,
right,
and then we got to deal with that. And you want to have like a steady state when you're doing this test, right? When we're doing
right,
a system performance test.
right. Well, and on top of that, the zoning system, it also had a bypass duct on it, and I know there were some suspicions that there might have been a little bit of leakage around that bypass duct that we had, that it wasn't 100% shut off just because of some of the temperatures that we were seeing. I don't think it was bad, but as bad as I've seen on some systems. But we suspected that that might have been going on a little bit, and then because of the size of the home, where we have multiple floors, we had, I think, what, 8 or 9 probes, wireless probes deployed. So all of a sudden, the probes start shutting down. So as we're looking at at the ComfortMaxx measurements and measureQuick, all of a sudden some of the temperature readings start dropping out randomly. So we're going around. Thank goodness you labeled which probes we had placed in which rooms at which registers and at the equipment, so we could go reset them all and then get all the measurements fresh at once. So one of the things, thank goodness, that happened to us is we did not run out of batteries.
Mhm.
We had a ton of batteries. So anytime you're doing this type of testing, make sure you got a lot of batteries. And if you do have batteries that might be older, go ahead and refresh them, because I know those instruments are real goofy when the voltages get low on batteries.
And we spent longer on the test than what would normally happen in the field
True,
because we were filming.
true.
We spent a lot of time filming, so normally you probably wouldn't run into the probes auto shutting off in that, but
Yeah,
it was just like an extra
it
added.
was complexity.
Yeah, right. And then one thing leading up, I know we spent a lot of time trying to, like, what do we need? Do we, what kind of camera equipment? What kind of tools do we need? What do we want
Oh
to
yeah,
show? I remember on the checklist, I had, on the computer, right, Microsoft To Do, I had a lot of checklist things in there,
Yeah.
but I didn't take it off the computer. That was
Yeah.
the problem. So we had, we were gonna bring booties, right, but I forgot the booties.
Yeah. Neither one of us remembered them. And the having the process down, the checklist, having everything right there, standardizing everything. We got I think we got caught up more on shooting the video sometimes than we did in doing the testing. Where if you're doing the testing, it's easy to get focused. But if you've got multiple things calling for your attention, it's easy to get distracted. And that checklist, those processes, that's your anchor point that keeps you from drifting.
Yep. Yep, and that not just with ComfortMaxx, I think that goes with everything with
Yeah,
HVAC, and you start to the more mistakes you make, that's how you create your process a lot of times,
agreed.
and you learn from your mistakes, and then you try to pass on your process and what you've learned to other people. Yeah.
Right. So we've been doing this a long time, and as you said, I'm glad that it wasn't just a standard, single zone system with the filter at the equipment because we learned a lot of lessons about, this is the stuff that every house in this neighborhood had the same type of an HVAC system. So this is something that people are they're going to run into. The guys that are using ComfortMaxx are going to run into it. So hopefully our lessons will keep them from having to run into this and making sure that you've got the right information. One thing I was so glad that you did, because this is so easy to do in that preparation, is making sure that you have the manufacturer's information. Go ahead, get the performance data, get the fan tables, get everything that you can think of about that equipment, and make sure that you've got it with you before you go out in the field. I mean, granted, you can find it a lot of times through a Google search, but having everything like you did in a document, of course, we uh, had it printed out. That that is priceless. So I think having that up front. So that was one part of the checklist you did have, was all the equipment together, all the equipment data together.
Yep, that worked out. One thing you just mentioned a minute ago is you said all the homes in the area have a similar system, right? Um, what was the first thing you noticed about the house when we started walking up from the street?
There was a window unit in the very front window. So that's like a red flag for comfort issues.
Yep, and the house is a couple, 2, 3 years old.
Yeah, a couple years old.
Window unit, yep, and they all have finished bedrooms above the garage. So I think there's probably common comfort issues with this whole subdivision,
Agreed.
right?
And the homeowner had expressed that to us, that the guest bedroom many times in the wintertime was very uncomfortable, and that their office was not comfortable. And that was the room that the window unit was in their office where they work from home remote.
Yep, absolutely. So, and that's one of the things, like we have the equipment is up in the attic,
Mhm.
right? And since it's zoned, now we have a drop coming down to the first floor, and it's easy to see why we don't have enough airflow at that in that office because it's probably the longest run in the entire house,
Yeah.
right?
And the other factor with that, because we're dealing with system performance, is that temperature. And if I remember right, the airflow wasn't that far off. But what it was missing was the temperature differential. We
Yep.
didn't have enough sensible BTUs coming into that space to cool it for the load that it was under.
And that's interesting. That's one of the things I was kind of curious about is the house had black flex duct,
Hmm.
right? And when we started going through the temperatures in Comfort Max and that, we started noticing that we didn't have the delivered temperature and the delivered BTUs that we should have.
Right,
I question. I'm in the Midwest. I don't really see black flex duct.
right.
We have the silver jacket, right? I wonder what the difference would have been with the only difference if the contractor would have installed the silver, the radiant barrier flex
That's
duct.
Yeah, because I mean, in that environment, it makes a big difference. And that's the cool thing about being able to use ComfortMax, is you can see those results in the field. So if someone had used that type of duct, I mean, that's one of the things that we went into, why the change was so important integrating with measureQuick, was so that it could sync up with probes to make the workflow just seamless. And as more Bluetooth tools are added to that, the capture of data is instantaneous. Because as we were there, one of the things that I know we interacted with was with the homeowner working remote, is we have all of a sudden inserted themselves into their lives. And most customers, they think you should be in the attic or at the outdoor unit. Where this testing, anytime you're doing a Comfort Max testing, you're doing full system performance testing, you're in almost every single room of the home. And so now it could get very intrusive. So communication was really important with the homeowner as we went in there to let them know. And their home, what was so cool, their home was meticulous. I was envious because my house looks like a bomb went off in it. Their rooms were meticulous to be able to work through there, but let them know, any place that there's a supply register or return grill, we're going to have to get in that space.
So let's talk a little bit about the workflow in ComfortMaxx. Like, what are we trying to figure out? What tools are we using? And I think that would be helpful to people to wrap their mind around what it is. Like, how do we start off? Uh, I think that one of the coolest parts about the beginning of the workflow is we are able to use some of the best new features
Right.
from measureQuick, right? So you start off profiling the system, you give the project a name, the customer's name, the address, and that, and then you need to label and spell out what kind of equipment you're looking at and working on. And I it's such a time saver using that AI system profiler.
That was cool. You
Yeah.
scanned that data tag and it populated all the information instead of having to enter it manually.
Actually, I didn't it wasn't even a scan. You take a picture. You just take a picture and you
And
take
it
a
just
picture of each data
populated
tag
it.
and boom, yeah, it answers everything.
That was
So,
fast. And I know when we did the original Comfort Max testing, one of the biggest problems, especially in a multi story home, was temperature ramping because you may have had different instruments, but you weren't getting the measurements all simultaneously because you had to get them right off the display. And what was so cool yesterday, when you pulled it up on your tablet, we could see the temperature measurements from the equipment entering, equipment exiting temperatures, and we could see the different temperatures on the floor. So we could see, on each floor, what it was coming at supply registers and the return grills. We had that system completely mapped while we're looking at the outdoor temperature entering the condenser. So everything at once instead of the way that it used to be, which was trying to gather it manually, and it was a real pain. So having connected smart probes has made this process so much faster and so much easier.
now one thing I want to caution is like using that yes, it's easier cuz you have a lot of measurements all in one shot, but it's not like you're taking a measurement, you're walking over to the next one, you're taking another measurement and you're writing it down. So imagine we were using 9
Yes,
probes,
we use
right?
nine
We used
probes.
9 probes yesterday. So the worst thing in my mind that you would want to do is take all your probes out, turn on all your probes all in one shot, and then try to start mapping them.
Yep.
Right. So the easiest way you got to kind of think through it because you're going to have 9 of the same tools in front of you, all flashing, and then you got to figure out what is what.
Right.
So it's almost better to turn on one at a time, map it,
Yep.
turn the next one on, map it, and kind of go through step by step like that. So you're organized and you don't misplace a probe.
Right. And something other that was really cool is anytime you're deploying multiple probes like that you had done was you had different colored heat shrink tubing on your different probes. Like you had your equipment probes as different colors than what your outdoor air temperature probe was. So that really I noticed helped streamline and cut down on the time.
That's a measure quick trick. I learned that at the train the trainer at measure quick.
That's a great trick.
But yeah, so the whole point is we want to look at equipment temperatures in Comfort Max. We're looking at entering temperature and exiting temperature. And in
Yep.
Measure Quick, you could look at relative humidity and wet bulb as well too. And it also looks at enthalpy. I think Measure Quick is calculating the enthalpy.
Yeah, you've got those two inputs, and then going back to one thing that you mentioned that was a struggle for us is getting different airflow measurements. So we had to know what the airflow moving through the equipment was first, and of course, there's multiple ways to do that. We estimated it because that was our only option, or we could have used a digital true flow grid, and if there was a filter rack at the equipment, then we had to get the system airflow, and I think sometimes there's a misnomer about what that is. Equipment airflow is what the fan is circulating, where delivered airflow is the total air coming out of the supply registers and then going back through the return grills. So we were able to see through those measurements, we were able to estimate live duct leakage on both the supply side and the return side, and the s- the ducts weren't that bad.
Yeah, so one thing that we did too, because we were trying to break the process, like
Correct.
that was, we were trying to see if we could get something to not shake out right, and there was 2 filter grills, and if you've used the TrueFlow grid with filter grills, you know that, you're taking a measurement at one grill, and then you blank off, or you tape off, or you put the filter in a bag on the other
Right.
grill. You're trying to redirect all the airflow through one grill, to get a true flow measurement, right? So we actually ran that step twice.
Yep.
There's 2 different size filter grills, and the one is a lot longer of a duct run as well
Right.
too.
It was a
And
14 by 20 on the first floor, and then I think it was a 20 by 25 on the second floor.
yeah, and the measurements, even though the much different length of duct run and much different size filter, we were less than a 5% difference in airflow
Yeah,
measurement.
it was minimal. I was surprised because of the discrepancy in sizes between the two different filter grill sizes, and then also the different duct lengths. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was a definitely a good learning experience for sure.
Yeah. The other thing that we got into, and we did this early because we were trying to get out of the attic before it really got brutal, was pressure profiling the system using probes, so we could see supply pressure. Of course, that includes anytime you're using the filter grills. That includes the filters and the duct system itself. But then we were also able to look at external static pressure. We were able to look at the coil pressure drop and supply duct pressures, so we could see where the restrictions were and be able to recommend a scope of work accordingly.
Do you remember where we had the worst restriction in the
It was on the return
on
side,
the
if I remember
return?
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Which it's somewhere between the return duct and the filters as well.
yeah,
However, the filter grills that he was using, he had the 3-inch filter, so you
yeah.
decent pressure drop across the filters.
Yeah, it wasn't bad at all. And when we got up in there, we were surprised because a lot of times the return is even worse undersized than what we saw. But we saw, I think there was what, a 16-inch duct and a 12-inch duct. But what killed that, and they were using long sweeping bends. I mean, you could tell that they had tried to do this job right. But I think the actual length is what got them. I mean, you look at the helix core in any type of flex duct, and it slows the air down. So I'm trying to minimize that makes a big deal.
Yep. And the just when we it's funny because as soon as we popped our head up into the attic, like, wow, these guys actually did a really nice job, you
Right.
know. Realistically though, what was happening with the static pressure? The static pressure was a little high,
Yeah. Yes, it was.
even with both zones on, and then we tried measuring total external static with one zone on to see
Right.
how much it changed. And it only went up what, like maybe 10%.
If
It
that.
still was
Yeah.
under an inch.
Yep.
I was surprised. I was like, this is going to be a high static system,
Yeah. And we'd estimated that going over there, what we might run into. But I think as we went through there, though, setting expectations with the homeowner, I think, was important because we were, with what we did, as you said, we were trying to break the process. And that's a part of the process a lot of times I don't think we consider is the customer engagement. That is, to me, that's what makes Comfort Max unique, is because it focuses on the product that you provide the homeowner, which is comfort and performance. And when you can take that and they can see that, the more that you can involve them in the process, the better. Letting them hold the balancing hood to get the measurements of air coming out of the registers, or showing them how the TrueFlow grid works, letting them work through the app. That engagement process is huge because instead of high pressure sales, one thing I'll always remember is Al Dambola called it static pressure sales. And what you're doing is you're teaching your customers about their systems. And as you go through the Comfort Max workflows, and then of course you generated a report that's both contractor and customer, they get to see the end result. So what you're doing is you're creating an experience for them as they're going through, and they get to see, they become a detective in their own home, and all of a sudden those questions are answered, like, why is my office not comfortable in the summer?
And it's a powerful thing at the end once you're done and you generate that report and you're looking at your equipment, you have a 99% or 98%. It's
Yeah.
operating actually really well. Your system, you got a D, it's a 68%. And then it basically, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and they just, you wouldn't know. And granted, the national average is 57%, so it did come out better than the national average. But that changes the discussion because now it's not based on equipment, it's based on the installation. So a contractor who's doing work that's good work and they can prove it, there is something empowering about that to be able to show that you actually install the best systems and then prove it. And one of the next steps that goes into that is being able to certify the system. So they can have a NCI certified system if they meet certain criteria. And then the other thing that goes along with that is there's a fear. We actually talked about that this morning. There is a fear of taking measurements because of the accountability that's often involved. Some people are scared of that. They don't want anything to do with it. And what we found is those that are attracted to NCI training, they thrive on that because they want to know how they're doing. That's those performance measurements. That's their scoreboard, so
Yeah.
they can see, where are we falling at on this.
Right. I think the biggest thing though is just to start testing. And even if you're struggle with it, I know we in every single NCI class we bring up like, hey, start testing on your house, start testing on your family's
Yeah.
house, somebody in your office. Play around with it and learn. I think Brian Orr says it, fail, or maybe it wasn't Brian, somebody said it, fail and fail fast, because you learn when you fail and
Yeah.
you're not going to succeed until you fail a lot of times. So take the measurements and then learn what to do with them.
Right.
Right.
That's a great point because, going back to the scoreboard, that's another sports analogy. Major League Baseball, Major League hitters will take thousands of practice shots. They start as little kids hitting off of a tee. They take thousands of swings before they'll ever step into a box in a game. So practicing, getting comfortable, getting confident with those measurements. The first time that you do this should not be in front of a homeowner. As you said, practice on your own home, practice on your office. That's where those learning experiences really start to take off.
And there's a when you're looking at system performance and you're playing with ComfortMaxx, there's a lot of different learned skills that you have to put together.
Great.
Everything is, there's static pressure measurements, airflow. We're looking at performance data on equipment. There's a lot of people that I spent years in the field without even knowing what a performance table was on a condenser.
Right.
Right. I thought a 4-ton unit was it was 48,000 BTUs. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing that can be intimidating, I know, to doing this type of work is the investment in the test instruments. I know that was a big hurdle for us to get past. And, what happened, well, some people know the story, some people don't, but our family company, we were going bankrupt when we learned about NCI. And that's one of the reasons that it'll always have a special place in my heart because what they taught us essentially saved our family company by going out and implementing it. We did not really have the money to go out and buy the test instruments, but by a chance encounter, we were able to get the money. We bought the test instruments, and then within 3 jobs, 3 duct renovation jobs, we had paid for those instruments, and they kept paying for themselves. So I mean, there's times if you're doing this, if you're not happy with where you're at, you got to take a leap of faith, and that's essentially what we did.
Well, I lived with the mindset for the longest time that people don't want to spend money and doing a lot of this stuff is expensive. So what's the point of offering it to them?
Agreed.
But the thing I learned very quickly is if you offer solutions, real solutions to people, there's a high percentage of people that actually want to fix their house and their system
Yeah.
just what's the worst thing they say? No, you know?
Exactly. And sometimes we don't do a very good job at explaining what they're seeing. That's what I love about ComfortMaxx is it breaks it down into colored reports that people can see. So it's really doing some of the translation for you. But many times we go in there, we get so technical that the customer doesn't understand the words that are coming out of our mouths. So they will, in that instance, they will go with what they do understand, which is price. They
Yeah.
understand dollars. And so many times we get mad and say, customers are cheap, customers are cheap. If everybody went off low price, all of us would be driving Yugos. So I don't buy that. What happens is people don't understand. We are poor communicators so many times. And seeing the results from a ComfortMaxx report like we generated yesterday, that is a communication tool that helps separate them and helps do some of that translation and communication for them.
And I challenge anybody to think about that, as far as their own home, right?
Agreed.
I've thought about that recently as well too. Is like you wanna have a competitive price with anything that you purchase. You think like I want a good price, but then I look back on it. I had drain tile installed. I had a sump pump installed, and they chose the cheapest products they could possibly use. And
Yeah.
like, I would have been okay paying a little bit more money if they would have offered me a better
Right.
solution, right?
Right.
And I think that goes heavily with anyone that has a home. You want a solution that works for you.
Yeah. And people don't like you said, they don't like throwing stuff away. And just like we showed with the homeowner yesterday, they were throwing away a little over a ton of cooling capacity. And there might be able to do something about it, might not. But people don't like losing. And to show them, that hey, there's ways that we can fix this. That there's a power to that. But we'll be sharing, I know, a whole lot more as we continue on. But I thought it was cool that you had the idea to, hey, let's talk about what we learned. That was because there was a lot.
Yep, it was a fun experience. Absolutely, I hopefully get the opportunity to do it again. But I gotta say, ComfortMaxx, I've been working on it for weeks now, and I'm giving it the stamp of approval. I think we're pretty much there.
That means a lot. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.